Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Sotah. We are up to Perek Zayin Mishnah Hey. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai Eliyahu ben Burcha Israel of Chana ben Miriam Sason ben Raya and Yoshua ben Shifra Menuchatam Began Eden Amen and Le'avdir ben Chaim Lechaim v'Derefua Shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa Betoch Shar Cholei Israel. The Mishnah discusses the next mitzvah listed in Mishnah 2, namely the blessings and curses said at Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval. Before the Jewish people entered Eretz Israel, Moshe told them that after they crossed the Jordan River and entered the land, they must perform a number of procedures, including building an altar of large stones and saying the blessings and curses. This is in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 27. Some details of these commandments were taught by Yoshua after the death of Moshe in the book of Yoshua, chapter 4. The Mishnah relates how the people carried out these instructions. Brachot uklalot ketzad. How were the blessings and curses said? Now, in contrast to the previous Mishnayot, which explain how we know that the language must be Hebrew, this Mishnah and those that follow explain how the mitzvah is performed. The previous Mishnot, which are about Bikurim and Chalitza, did not describe the performance of the mitzvot because even their basic laws are too numerous and complex to be contained in one Mishnah. The entire Masechet of Bikurim is devoted to the laws of Bikurim, and an entire chapter in Masechet Yevamot deals with the laws of Chalitza. On the other hand, though, it is not clear why this Mishnah, which concerns the blessings and curses, and those that follow, which is Birkat Kohanim, etc., do not give the source for the obligation to use Hebrew, as the commentaries point out. So again, Brachot uklalot ketzad. How were the blessings and curses said? Kivan shavru Yisrael et Yarden. Once the Jewish people crossed the Jordan River, ubau el har Gerizim ve'el har Eval shebeshomron shebetzad Shechem shebe'etzel Elonei Moreh, and they came to Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval, which are in the region of Samaria, Shomron, next to Shechem, which is the same as saying that they are next to Elonei Moreh, as it says in Dvarim, chapter 11, verse 30, because Elonei Moreh is another name for Shechem. Now, before describing what happened there, the Mishnah explains how we know that Elonei Moreh and Shechem are the same place. Shenemar, halo hema be'ever Eden ve'gomer. This is because it is said about Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval. They are surely on the other side of the Jordan River, near Elonei Moreh. Ula'alanu omer ve'yavo Avraham be'eretz ad mekom Shechem ad Elon Moreh. And in another place, it says in Bereshit, chapter 12, verse 6, Abram passed through the land until he reached the place of Shechem, until Elon Moreh. Ma Elon Moreh amur la'alan Shechem, just as the Elon Moreh mentioned there regarding Abram is Shechem, as is clear from that verse. Af Elon Moreh amur kan Shechem. So too the Elon Moreh mentioned here regarding Mount Gerizim, Mount Eval, is Shechem. Now the Mishnah returns to describing the ceremony of the blessings and curses. Shisha shvatim alu lerosh har Gerizim. 6 tribes went up to the top of Mount Gerizim. V'shisha shvatim alu lerosh har Eval, and 6 tribes went up to the top of Mount Eval. The tribes that went up to Mount Gerizim were Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Yosef, and Binyamin. The tribes that went up to Mount Eval were Reuven, Gad, Asher, Zvulun, Dan, and Naphtali. As it says in Dvarim, chapter 27, verses 12 to 13. והכהנים והלוויים והארון עומדים למטה באמצע, and the Kohanim, the Leviim, and the ark stood below in the middle between the 2 mountains. Now only the elders of the Kohanim and Leviim stood between the mountains. The rest of the tribe of Levi stood on Mount Gerizim, as stated as the commentaries point out. HaKohanim makifin et Aaron והלוויים et HaKohanim. The Kohanim surrounded the ark and the Leviim surrounded the Kohanim. The Kol Yisrael mikan and mikan, and all of Israel stood on this side on Mount Gerizim, and on that side on Mount Eval. Shenema v'chol Yisrael uzkenav v'shotrim v'shoftav omdim mizeh u'mizeh la'aron v'gomer, as it is said in the book of Yoshua, chapter 8, verse 33. And all of Israel and its elders and officers and its judges stood on this side and on that side of the ark on Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval, etc., opposite the Kohanim, the Leviim, the bearers of the ark of the covenant of Hashem. Hafchu pneim klapei har Gerizim patchu babracha. The Kohanim and Leviim who stood between the mountains turned their faces to Mount Gerizim and started with the first blessing. The Torah and Dvarim, chapter 27, verses 15 through 26, lists 12 curses, each of which applies to a person who committed a specific sin. Although the Torah does not mention any blessings, the sages knew that each curse was preceded by a blessing for those who did not commit that sin, as Rashi explains in Masechet Sotah, page 32a. Blesses the man who does not make an engraved or metal image. And both those on Mount Gerizim and those on Mount Eval answered Amen. They then turned their faces toward Mount Eval and started with the first curse in Dvarim, chapter 27, verse 15. Curses the man who makes an engraved or metal image, etc. And both those on Mount Gerizim and those on Mount Eval answered Amen. They continued this way until they finished all the 12 blessings and curses. Earlier that day, after crossing the Jordan River, the Jews had taken 12 large stones from the riverbed and carried them to Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. The Mishnah describes what they did with those stones there. After the reciting of the blessings and curses, they brought the stones that they had taken from the river and built the altar with them on Mount Ebal, meaning the altar that the Torah had commanded them to build. Now the Mishnah indicates that they built the altar after the blessings and curses. However, the Torah's instructions in Dvarim, chapter 27, state the opposite. First, it describes the building of the altar as well as the other procedures listed below in the Mishnah, and only then does it describe the blessings and curses, and this problem is dealt with. The Tiferet Yitzhak deals with this problem. V'saduhu basid, and they coated it with plaster. V'chatvu alav et kol divrei Torah b'shivim lashon, and they wrote on it all the words of the Torah from the beginning of Bereshit to the end of Dvarim in the 70 languages. Miraculously, they were able to write the entire Torah in 70 languages in a single day, and were able to fit it on just 12 stones. By writing the Torah in the 70 languages of the 70 nations of the world, they made it possible for every nation to study the Torah, and also no nation could claim that the Torah was hidden from them. Shenemar, as it says in Dvarim chapter 27, verse 8, Ba'er hetev, you shall write all the words of this Torah on the stones, explained well in a way that all the people of the world can understand. Then after bringing offerings on the altar, they took the stones dismantling the altar and went and spent the night in their place, meaning they traveled to Gilgal and spent the night there. They erected the stones in Gilgal and left them there as a monument to the miracle that God performed when he split the Jordan River to let the people cross to the other side. It says in the book of Yoshua, chapter 4, verses 19 through 24. Now, the next mitzvah mentioned in Mishnah 2 was Birkat Kohanim, the blessing given by the Kohanim in the temple. Birkat Kohanim was recited every day after the morning tamid was offered, as the Rambam writes in the Chut Tfilah, chapter 14, Halacha 14. Outside the temple, it is recited when the Chazan repeats the Shmona Esrei of Shachrit every day, Musaf of Shabbat Yom Tov, Neilah of Yom Kippur, and on some fast days, Mincha, as the Rambam writes in Hilchot Tfilah, chapter 14, Halachot 1 through 2. So this Mishnah, Mishnah Vav, teaches some differences between how the blessing was said in the temple and how it was said outside the temple. So here too, the Mishnah deals only with the performance of the mitzvah, not the requirement to say it in Hebrew. The obligation to use Hebrew is derived from the following Zerah Shava. The Torah uses the verb barech, bless, in reference to Birkat Kohanim in Bamidbar, chapter 6, verse 25, and also in reference to the blessings and curses said at Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal in Dvarim, chapter 27, verse 12. Therefore, just as the latter must be said in Hebrew, so must the former. Just as the blessings and curses have to be said in Hebrew, so to Birkat Kohanim. The Mishnah begins, Birkat Kohanim Kitzad. How is Birkat Kohanim performed? Bamidina Omrim Otah Shalosh Brachot. And the rest of the country outside the temple, the Kohanim say it as 3 separate blessings, pausing after each of the 3 verses for the people to answer Amen. Ubamikdash Bracha Achat. But in the temple, they said all the verses together as one long blessing, because the practice in the temple was not to answer Amen after blessings. In the temple, nothing was said at the end of a blessing. Rather, after hearing God's name, the listeners called out, Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Blessed is the name of the glory of his kingdom forever and ever. In the temple, therefore, the Kohanim did not pause after each verse, but only after they said God's name, so it is described as one blessing. Bamikdash Omer et Hashem Kichtavo. In the temple, the Kohen says the name of God as it is written, his 4-letter name, Yud K Vav K. Ubamidina Bechinuyo. But in the rest of the country, meaning outside the temple, the Kohen uses its alternative. Well, we use Shem Adnut, Aleph, and then Dalet, and then Nun, and then Yud. The Torah forbids pronouncing a special name of God as it is written anywhere except in the temple. Now, when reciting the blessing, the Kohanim have to raise their hands. This was done differently in the temple than elsewhere. But Medina, Kohanim nosim etiden keneged kitfehen. In the rest of the country, the Kohanim raise their hands as high as their shoulders. But Mikdash al geber shehen. But in the temple, they raise their hands above their heads. In the temple, where the Kohanim pronounce a special name of God, the divine presence rested on the joints of their hands. Because of the honor due to the divine presence, they raise their hands above their heads. Chutz mi Kohen Gadol she'eno makbiya et yadav lemala min hatzitz, except for the Kohen Gadol, who did not raise his hands higher than the tzitz, the gold plate he wore on his forehead, because the name of God was written on the tzitz, and it is not proper to raise one's hands above the name of God. Now the next Tana disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says, Av Kohen Gadol makbiya yadav lemala min hatzitz. Even the Kohen Gadol raises his hands above his head higher than the tzitz. The Rav does tell us that Halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda, and the Mishnah gives a source for the basic law that a Kohen must raise his hands for Birkat Kohanim. Because it is stated in Vayikra chapter 9 verse 22, Aaron raised his hands toward the people and blessed them. Although Aaron is only mentioned here, the law applies to all Kohanim, as it is written, to stand and to serve in the name of God. He, meaning referring to Aaron and his sons all the days. This is in Dvarim, chapter 18, verse 5. This verse puts Aaron together with his sons, teaching that his sons, the Kohanim, must also raise their hands when blessing the people, as the Rav explains based on the Gemara in Masechet Sotah, page 38a. And that is an Abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.